The first thing my husband said wasn't hello. It wasn't we need to talk or something happened. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his work jacket, and said, "No one is going to keep her. So she might as well stay here for now." Behind him stood a little girl. She was small, too small for 10, but not in the soft, childlike way people romanticize. This was the kind of small that comes from learning how to disappear early. Her shoulders were tight. Her chin was lifted in a way that looked like confidence until you noticed her fingers digging into the handle of a scuffed purple suitcase, knuckles pale, like she was holding herself together through it. I remember thinking absurdly that the suitcase looked older than she did. "My name is Evelyn," I said, before my husband could add another sentence that would sit wrong in the room forever. The girl didn't answer. "She doesn't talk much," my husband, Aaron, said. "Or she does. Depends. She's difficult." Difficult. Adults love that word. It sounds neutral, responsible, like a diagnosis instead of a failure. The girl's eyes flicked to him, then back to the floor. "This is Nora," he continued, as if reading off a list. "My daughter." My stomach dropped in a slow, delayed way, like missing a step you didn't know was gone. Aaron had told me he had a child once, years ago. He'd mentioned it the way people mention an old injury or a college major they never used. A previous relationship? Complicated. The mother moved around a lot. He paid support. Courts were unfair. He'd done what he could. I believed him. Believing him had been easier than imagining a child growing up without anyone choosing her. "She'll sleep in the guest room," he said, already stepping out of his shoes. "Just until we figure something out. Figure something out." Nora didn't move. She didn't look around. She stood perfectly still in my hallway, like movement might cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. I crouched, lowering myself to her level, ignoring the sudden awareness of how loud my own breathing felt. "Hi," I said gently. "You can put your bag down if you want." She shook her head. "I might need it," she said quietly. Not "I want it," "I might need it." That sentence lodged somewhere behind my ribs and stayed there. Aaron had already walked into the kitchen, opening the fridge, rattling bottles like the house belonged to him in a way it never had to her. I showed Nora the guest room. Clean. Neutral. Too clean. The kind of room that says you're temporary even when no one means to. She placed the suitcase beside the bed instead of on it. Didn't unzip it. Didn't sit. "I'll make dinner," I said. "Is there anything you don't eat?" She hesitated. "Whatever's fine. Children who have preferences believe they'll be asked again." That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, wondering how long a "for now" could stretch before it snapped. The next morning, Nora woke up early. I know because I found her sitting at the kitchen table before the sun came up, still wearing the same clothes, the suitcase at her feet like a guard dog. "You didn't sleep?" I asked. She shrugged. "I sleep light." Aaron didn't notice. He never did. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his coffee, complained about traffic, and left without acknowledging her at all. "She'll get used to us," he said over his shoulder. "Just don't let her run the house." The house. By day 3, I knew this wasn't about running anything. Nora watched everything. How I moved through the rooms. How I spoke to the neighbors. How long I paused before answering texts. She flinched when the phone rang. She ate fast, eyes darting, like food was something that could be taken away mid-bite. At night, I passed the guest room and saw the same thing every time. Nora asleep on top of the covers, one hand looped through the suitcase handle. She didn't trust sleep enough to let go. On day 5, Aaron noticed her. She talked back when he told her to turn the TV down. She slammed the bathroom door. "She's disrespectful," he said later. Irritation sharpened into certainty. "This is what I mean. She doesn't know boundaries. She's scared," I said. He laughed. "You're already doing that thing." Making excuses? I didn't know yet that this was the beginning of the end. I only knew something was wrong in a way that couldn't be fixed by rules. Things started breaking the following week. A mug slipped from her hands. A picture frame tipped off the shelf. Once, I caught her lifting a decorative bowl. holding it just long enough for me to see the choice flicker across her face before letting it drop. It shattered loudly. She froze. Then she looked at me, eyes wide, waiting, for yelling, for punishment, for proof. I knelt and began picking up the pieces. "Are you hurt?" I asked. Her mouth opened, then closed. "No," she said finally, confused. That night, the school called. Behind academically, trouble focusing, refusing to complete assignments. I sat with Nora at the kitchen table every evening after that. Math worksheets between us, pencils chewed to stubs. She fought every correction like it was an insult, like learning meant admitting weakness. Aaron stopped joining us. "You're home," he said. "This is your thing." Then came the doctor's appointment, the one that took too long. The doctor's pause, the careful words. "I'd like to refer her to cardiology," she said gently, "just to be safe." Aaron sighed in the car, like the appointment had personally inconvenienced him. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered. "All this drama." Drama. That word, too. My mother called when she heard. "You didn't sign up for this," she said. "You have to think about your own future." Aaron's mother was less careful. "Send her back," she snapped. "Wherever she came from. She's not your responsibility." Nora heard everything. Children always do. The suitcase never moved. The day Aaron said it out loud was the day something in me broke cleanly in two. "She isn't wanted by anyone," he said, standing in the kitchen like he was reading a weather report. "So why are we forcing this? Just send her back." Nora stood in the hallway. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She walked toward me slowly, like her legs might give out, and wrapped her arms around my waist with a strength that felt desperate and ancient. "Please," she whispered. "I'll be better. I promise." Her body shook. I looked at Aaron and saw him clearly for the first time, not cruel, not monstrous, just a man who wanted his life to be easier, and didn't care who paid the cost. "She's staying," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a speech. I just stayed, and that, I would learn, was the most dangerous choice I could have made. Aaron didn't argue when I said she was staying. That should have been a warning. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't slam doors or accuse me of betrayal. He just went quiet in a way that made the house feel smaller, like all the air had been slowly let out and we were pretending not to notice. Silence was always his sharpest tool. For days, he moved through the house as if Nora were an object he hadn't agreed to purchase. He spoke to me. He spoke to his mother on the phone. He spoke to the dog. He did not speak to her. When he acknowledged her existence, it was sideways, indirect. "She eats too much sugar," he'd say, looking at me, not her. "She's too loud. She's influencing the way the house feels." Nora responded by becoming invisible. She stopped breaking things. She stopped pushing back. She folded into herself like paper creased too many times. She cleaned without being asked. She watched the clock obsessively. She learned which floorboards creaked and avoided them. She learned when Aaron would come home and made sure she wasn't in the room. One afternoon, I found her rearranging the pantry. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I like being useful," she replied quickly, too quickly, as if usefulness were a currency she was terrified of running out of. That night, she unpacked the suitcase. Not fully, just enough to look convincing. Clothes folded neatly into the dresser. A toothbrush placed in the cup. The suitcase slid under the bed, half-zipped, angled so she could pull it out in seconds. A contingency plan. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, doing math I didn't want to do. One income. A child with medical appointments. A husband who had emotionally checked out and was starting to resent me for not following the version of life he'd imagined. Love didn't feel noble. It felt logistical. The first lawyer I met with smelled like coffee and paper cuts. She listened without interrupting as I explained the situation, fingers steepled, eyes kind but realistic. "You don't have legal authority over her," she said gently. "If her father decides to take her, you can't stop him. What if he doesn't want her?" I asked. She didn't smile. "That doesn't automatically give you rights. Love isn't enough in court." I drove home, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. That evening, I asked Aaron to sign temporary guardianship paperwork. I framed it carefully. Medical appointments, school forms, convenience. He resisted at first, not because he cared about Nora, but because it felt like losing something he hadn't realized he was holding. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he said. But he signed. He always chose the path of least resistance. The divorce conversation came weeks later, quietly, on an ordinary afternoon when nothing dramatic seemed poised to happen. Aaron stood in the same kitchen, the same place where he'd said she wasn't wanted, and told me he was leaving. "I've been seeing someone," he said, "for a while." There it was. No apology, no explanation, just information. "She's younger," he added, as if youth were a solution. "No kids, no complications." "And Nora?" I asked. He sighed, rubbing his face like this was all very tiring. "That's on you now." He packed a bag that night and left without saying goodbye to her. Nora watched from the hallway, silent, eyes hollow. "She always leaves," she said later, sitting at the edge of my bed. "Adults just don't say it right away." I pulled her into my arms and felt how light she was. The paperwork moved slowly. Temporary guardianship became longer term. School records transferred. Doctors learned my name. Child support appeared automatically, efficient and impersonal. Aaron took weekends when it suited him. Nora stayed behind. Always. At first, she asked why. Then she stopped. Something shifted after that. Not magically. Not all at once. But the testing stopped. The fear softened into something quieter. We developed routines. Mornings with toast and checklists. Homework at the kitchen table. Color-coded appointments on the fridge. I learned her tells. When she cleaned obsessively, she was anxious. When she hovered nearby, she needed reassurance she didn't know how to ask for. One afternoon, months later, I sat in the armchair by the window with a book I'd owned since college. Its spine was cracked, margins full of notes from a younger version of myself who believed stories could explain everything. Nora wandered in and stopped. "What's that about?" she asked. "A man who makes a bad choice," I said, "and spends the rest of his life living with it." She considered this. "Does he know it's bad when he makes it?" "No," I said. "He thinks he's protecting himself." She nodded slowly. "Can you read it to me?" I hesitated. "It's not for kids." "I'm not really a kid," she said, not defensively, just stating a fact. "So I read." At first, she fidgeted. Then she leaned closer. When I stopped at the end of the chapter, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. "Can we do another tomorrow?" she asked. Books became her refuge, then her obsession, then her voice. One afternoon, she handed me a notebook. "Don't laugh," she said. I didn't. Under the uneven handwriting and run-on sentences, there was something unmistakable, a voice that had waited a long time to be heard. And that was when I realized something irreversible had already happened. She wasn't just staying. She was beginning to believe she could. The thing no one tells you about choosing to stay is that it doesn't feel like a single decision. It feels like 1,000 small ones you make when you're already tired. Nora didn't transform into a grateful child overnight. She didn't suddenly trust the world or stop bracing for loss. What changed was subtler. She stopped watching the door every time my phone buzzed. She stopped flinching when I raised my voice to call her from another room. She began leaving her shoes by the door instead of lining them up beside the bed like she might need to flee. Progress came quietly, disguised as ordinary life. School was still hard. Nora was behind in ways that didn't show up neatly on report cards. She could read, technically, but she read like someone crossing thin ice carefully, nervously, ready to retreat. Writing assignments overwhelmed her. Math made her jaw clench so tight I worried about her teeth. Every afternoon, we sat at the kitchen table. Some days we worked. Some days we stared at the same worksheet for 40 minutes and called it a win because no one cried. Doctors came next. Glasses she'd needed for years. Anxiety that lived in her body like a constant hum. Follow-up appointments that stacked themselves into my calendar until the squares ran out of room. People started asking questions. Well-meaning ones. Invasive ones. Is she yours? Do you have custody? Where's her real mom? I learned to answer calmly, politely, even when the word real scraped against something raw. Aaron reappeared occasionally, usually when it was convenient. A birthday text. A holiday call that lasted less than 2 minutes. He told people he was proud. He told himself it counted. Nora stopped expecting anything from him, which was both a relief and a quiet kind of grief. The boys at school were kinder than most adults. Children don't ask for backstories the way grown-ups do. They cared that she was good at listening, that she could run fast, that she laughed at the same jokes. She made friends slowly, cautiously, like someone placing weight on a bridge one step at a time. At home, she hovered near me. In the kitchen, in the doorway of my office, on the couch while I folded laundry. "What are you doing?" she'd ask. "Just boring stuff," I'd answer. She'd nod, satisfied, as if boring were proof of safety. One evening, I found her sitting on the floor outside my bedroom, notebook in her lap. "I didn't want to interrupt," she said. "Come in," I told her. She read me a story. It was about a girl who lived in a house with too many doors and no locks. It wasn't polished. It wandered. But when she finished, she looked up at me with something close to hope. "What happens to her?" I asked. Nora thought for a moment. "She learns which door is hers." I swallowed hard. I took her writing to her teacher. The response was polite. Non-committal. "She's imaginative," the teacher said. "But kids usually grow out of this." Kids. I smiled, thanked her, and walked out feeling like I'd been handed a dismissal disguised as kindness. That night, I searched online and found a community writing program at the local library. Workshops, mentors, small groups. They read Nora's work and didn't smile politely. They leaned forward. They asked questions. They treated her words like they mattered. Nora bloomed there in ways I hadn't known to imagine. She learned how to revise without feeling erased, how to hear criticism without translating it into rejection. Her stories sharpened. Her confidence followed, cautiously, like a shadow learning it was allowed to exist. Life didn't suddenly get easy. Panic attacks still came, sometimes out of nowhere. We'd sit on the bathroom floor, backs against the tub, counting breaths until her hands stopped shaking. Some nights, I found her asleep with a book open on her chest, the suitcase still under the bed but untouched. It moved farther back over time, not gone, just less urgent. Years passed like that, slowly, then all at once. Nora grew taller. Her voice deepened. Her laughter came easier. She stopped asking permission to take up space. One night, as I tucked her in, she asked, "Do you think people can really change?" "Yes," I said, "but not always in the ways we want them to." She nodded. "I think I am." I nodded too. I didn't say how much I was changing with her. By the time she was 16, the suitcase had been replaced by a bookshelf. It stood against the far wall of her room, shelves bowing under the weight of novels and notebooks stuffed with drafts. The suitcase still existed. I knew it did, but it lived in the attic now, zipped shut, no longer within reach of sleep. Change, I learned, doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives when you stay long enough. High school taught Nora how to look steady. It taught her how to raise her hand without shaking, how to smile when teachers praised her work, how to sit in crowded hallways without bolting for the nearest exit. From the outside, she became the kind of teenager people assumed had always been fine. 2 parents, a stable home, no real damage. Normal is a convincing performance. Inside, the panic never fully left. It showed up during exams, in rooms that felt too loud, in moments of unexpected praise that made her feel like the ground might disappear if she stepped too confidently onto it. When it happened, she didn't lash out anymore. She came to me. She sat on the kitchen floor. I sat beside her. We breathed. We stayed. Aaron resurfaced more often once Nora's achievements became public enough to reflect back on him. A writing contest win, a piece published in a regional journal, an invitation to speak at a youth event. His messages were careful, filled with praise that landed awkwardly, like someone trying to hug you after a decade of absence. "So proud of you," Always knew you had talent, Nora replied politely. Briefly. She never asked for more. Her biological mother reached out too, once Nora's name started traveling beyond our city. Los Angeles hadn't delivered the dream she'd chased. Relationships ended. Money thinned. Nostalgia softened memory until abandonment started to look like a misunderstanding. She arrived with dramatic emotion and open arms, as if 10 years could be folded away with the right tone of voice. Nora hugged her back. Gently. Briefly. Then stepped away. I watched from across the room, heart pounding, resisting every instinct to intervene. This was Nora's boundary to draw. She drew it cleanly. College acceptance letters arrived in thick envelopes. Scholarships, writing programs, possibilities that felt almost too large for our kitchen table. Nora chose a school known for its literature department, far enough away to feel like forward motion, close enough to come home when the world got heavy. The night before she left, I stood in her doorway and watched her pack, not the suitcase. 2 new ones. Solid. Wheels that didn't wobble. Clothes folded neatly. Books chosen carefully. A laptop tucked into a padded sleeve. She moved with confidence, checking lists, charging devices, preparing in a way that felt entirely different from the girl who once slept with a half-packed bag under her bed. When everything was done, she sat on the floor and looked at me. "Can you stay until I fall asleep?" she asked. Of course I stayed. College changed her in quieter ways. She learned how to sit across from editors who spoke in careful praise and sharper edits. She learned how not to mistake criticism for rejection. Her name began to appear in places I'd never been. First in journals, then anthologies, then invitations. I attended what I could. Read everything. Cheered from the quiet places. 10 years after Nora arrived in my hallway, I found myself sitting in an auditorium that smelled faintly of dust and polished wood. The lights were too bright, the crowd too large. Nora was receiving a national award for young writers. Not celebrity famous, not viral, but real. The kind of recognition that opens doors slowly, steadily. I noticed Erin before I noticed her. Second row. Polished, comfortable, flanked by familiar faces leaning forward like they'd earned their seats in the story of her life. I didn't look at them for long. When Nora walked onto the stage, she was calm, composed, the kind of young woman people assume had an easy beginning. She thanked her mentors, her editors, the librarian who'd slipped her extra books and never made her feel strange for wanting more. Then she paused. Not a dramatic pause, a real one, the kind that empties a room. And that was when I understood before she spoke that something irreversible was about to happen. "My mom saved my life," Nora said. She didn't rush the words. She didn't soften them. She didn't explain. She just let them exist in the air long enough to land. She didn't say stepmother. She didn't say guardian. She didn't say the woman who helped me. She said my mom. For half a second before the applause exploded, the room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. In that silence, I watched 3 faces in the second row shift in perfect unison. First blank, then pale, then tight, like muscles bracing for impact. People who had once said she was too much, too difficult, too inconvenient. People who had suggested programs, alternatives, sending her back. They sat there, publicly, while strangers applauded the woman they had tried to shame into giving her away. I didn't look at them again. I kept my eyes on Nora. She finished her speech with grace, thanked the room, stepped back from the microphone, and disappeared behind the curtain like she hadn't just rewritten the story of her own life in a single sentence. The applause followed her. I stayed seated, because staying had always been my role. Later, in a hotel bathroom that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and something floral I couldn't place, I stood in front of the mirror and wiped off my makeup with a cotton pad. The lights were harsh. Hotel lights always are. They don't flatter. They interrogate. My eyes were tired. My cheeks flushed. My dress navy, bought on sale years ago, creased where I'd sat too long. I didn't look like a hero. I looked like a woman who had lived. Outside the bathroom door, I could hear the muffled chaos of the event winding down. Laughter, Doors opening and closing. Someone calling Nora's name. I thought about the version of this story that almost happened. The version where I'd listened. The version where I'd told myself I wasn't equipped, wasn't responsible, wasn't obligated. The version where an 8-year-old girl learned permanently that adults keep you only when you're easy. In that version, the suitcase stayed packed. In this one, it lived in the attic, zipped shut, gathering dust. The years after that night didn't arrive all at once. They layered themselves quietly. Nora graduated. She moved cities. She worked jobs that paid little and demanded much. She learned how to sit across from editors who spoke in careful praise and sharper edits. She learned how to let criticism refine her instead of erasing her. Her name traveled farther than our small town ever had. First in journals, then anthologies, then on the spines of books stacked in places I'd never been. Aaron told people he was proud. He said it often. He said it loudly. He said it as if pride were a substitute for presence. Nora accepted the words politely. From a distance. Some relationships don't end with explosions. They end with less and less reach. Years later, she called me and asked if I wanted to see a place she'd found. It was near water. Quiet, modest. The kind of place people choose not to impress anyone, but to breathe. I bought the one next door too, she said casually. For what? I asked. She smiled. For you. If you want it. So we can be close but not crowded. I laughed. Then cried. Then did both at once. Because years earlier, back when bills felt heavier than hope and exhaustion lived in my bones, I had once sighed and said, "Someday, I just want to live near water," she had remembered. That's how love shows itself, I think. Not in grand gestures, but in memory. In noticing what someone needs and holding on to it until you can give it back. When Nora told me she was pregnant, she watched my face carefully. Old habits don't disappear just because life improves. You don't have to be perfect, I said before she could ask anything. You just have to stay. She exhaled, long and slow. Later, when her children were old enough to ask questions, she told them the truth in pieces that fit their age. She didn't poison the past. She didn't romanticize it either. She taught them that some adults leave, some stay, and staying is a skill you practice. One afternoon, sitting on the porch as the water rippled in late light, Nora said something that landed harder than any award speech ever could. You see what kids could be, she said. And you don't throw them away when they're hard. I didn't answer right away. Some truths deserve silence. That night, in another hotel bathroom, in another city, I wiped makeup from my face and looked at the woman in the mirror. Not heroic, not impressive, just someone who had stayed, and staying, I realized, had been the loudest thing I'd ever done. If you're still here, thank you for staying with this story. Stories like this don't end with neat morals, but they do leave questions behind. So, here's one for you. If you were standing in that kitchen, hearing someone say a child wasn't needed by anyone, would you choose 1 to protect your comfort? Or 0 to stay and let your life change? Drop a 1 or a 0 inches the comments. I read every one. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, remember someone, or reconsider a moment from your own life, consider staying with this channel. These are the stories we tell here. Quiet ones, uncomfortable ones, the kind that don't shout but don't let go. Thank you for being here.